I'm Dave Hendrickson. Leroy Hyatt and I would like to welcome you to another edition of Fly Tying, the Angler's Art. Today we're going to tie 3 flies, 2 representative flies of natural insects. We're going to tie the dry and the nymph stage of the Hendrickson, and then we're going to get really ridiculous and go to the other extreme and tie a clipped antelope hair mouse. Now the Hendrickson, again, is more or less an eastern fly, but again it's an excellent pattern all over the country, wherever you want something in a tan gray shade. Right. It's one of the earliest hatches in the east. It comes out, about the end of April. It's always one of the first hatches that the eastern people look forward to. It hatches for about a 6-week period, fairly heavy to start with, and then tapers off. Might start trickling in a couple of weeks early, but along about the end of April, you start looking for the Hendricksons, and that really signals the time that fly fishing is getting underway in the east.
First time I saw this fly, I thought of a blue-wing olive.
Yeah.
It's a little bit light for an olive, but you know,
well, and the body's a little different color, but you know, they're all about the same, different variations and different shades. And again, just because we call it an eastern fly doesn't mean it can't be used other places, elsewhere. But it does represent a specific hatch in the east.
Well, Dave, let's go through the material. I will use a blue dun hackle. I will use, again, the lemon wood duck for the wing material, or you could use the dyed mallard breast. I will use a tan dubbing, and I'll use a tan thread. Again, a light thread, as light as you feel comfortable getting by with. I have the hook in the vise already. I pinched the barb off. This is a size 14, again. And I'll dress the hook shank just in the portion right now where I'm going to put the wing. Take one of these little lemon duck wood duck feathers, and I want to strip that back part off. Don't need it at all. Probably ought to do a little bit more than that.
It's nice if you can get a feather that's fairly square on the tip so that all the fibers are about the same length.
Yes. And sometimes that's a little hard to find. I'm just going to pull this feather through until it's about the right height or length to stand up. Should be about twice the length, about 1.5 times the gap of the hook.
Well, now, the hackle should be about 1.5 times the gap of the hook, but the wing should stand up another quarter, so about twice.
About twice. I started to say that, and then I got off on something else.
Well, that's understandable.
I'm just going to figure 8 through this wing. Do it a couple of times is really all you need. That will divide the wing out nicely. And I'll bring the thread back to the end of the, above the barb. I'm going to take a gray hackle, natural gray. I'm just going to pull a few hackle fibers off, which will become the tail.
Here's a good place, if you can find them, to use the spade hackles.
Yes.
The spade hackles are those that grow along the sides of a neck.
Much stiffer.
Stiffer and longer. Very glossy.
Now I'll measure this out. It should be the length of the shank. Lay it on there. I'm going to trim that section off I don't need and just tie it down.
Here again, as we've said before, on the eastern style flies especially, I prefer to have my tails sticking back parallel to the hook shank.
Straight as you can
Some
get
people
them.
like them tilted up and some like them down, but
whatever has
me,
worked for you
straight.
before, sure. And then we'll make this dubbing just as absolute sparse as we can get it. I had a little bit too much right there.
To me, that sparseness, as I've said so often before, and I'm sure I'll say again, that's the secret to tying the good eastern style of tapered bodies, but really on any fly.
Because you can shape the body as you want.
Now, to me, from over here, I'd even say that looks a little heavy, but
it could be.
But it's not bad, and you'll find that it'll compress as you wrap it down with the finer stuff that's in front of it.
And the fibers on that dubbing are a little bit long too, which might make it look that way. Now I'm just going to start forward. I'll go back over it slightly. This is what is going to start building that taper section up.
And even though there was a little bit much on there, you see that finer section you had ahead of it compresses the other.
Sure does.
And you still get a nicely tapered body.
Sure
but
does.
You should always strive to have just a fuzzy thread and build your taper up with more wraps. And if you have to put on some more dubbing, that's fine.
Oh, absolutely. Now I'm up to the wing section. Now this time I have a saddle hackle rather than a 2 neck hackles. I'll tie that stem in, run my tying thread forward.
Yeah, and it's sort of a medium to light done, right?
A little, yes, yes. In fact, if I had one just a little bit darker, I might go ahead and use that one, but this one will work just fine.
And speaking of color shades, I might say that the body color of the Hendrickson does vary from stream to stream. And it pays to really look at the insects if you're fishing to specific hatches. It pays to look at the insect and try to match the specific colors by changing your dubbing blend.
And different times of that hatch, the color will also change.
From light to dark on the bodies, lighten up and darken up a little bit. And the fish can be pretty fussy.
Now the hackle is on. I'll go ahead and put a small whip finish on here. Trim that thread off. And we'll put a little touch of cement on it. And that's a dry Hendrickson, Dave. I really think this came out pretty nice.
It looks good to me. And I'm sure it would to the fish too. Tell us one more time what you use for materials.
For material, for the wing, we have the lemon wood duck. For the hackle, we have the gray, medium dun, and tail. And for the body, we have a light tan dubbing.
All right, we just finished tying the Hendrickson Dry fly. I think that matches the Ephemerella subvaria, if you want to get technical about it. I think that's what it is.
You want to do.
And, you know, if you're fishing to an emergence, it's often good to also have the nymph pattern of the same insect along. So what we're going to do now is we're going to tie the nymph of the Hendrickson, which is good to fish just as the hatch is building, or some cases even when the hatch is going on. If your dry fly is not doing the trick and the hatch is on, try fishing the nymph even as an emerger.
A little closer to the surface.
A little closer to the surface.
Yes.
So let's do the Hendrickson nymph.
Okay, for the hackle material, I'll use one that's a little bit rare. It's called a Cree. You can see there's multiple color in it. For the wing case, we'll use a dark brown turkey tail feather. And again, the body color varies a lot on these, but for this show, we'll go ahead and use a dark brown dubbing. And then I'm going to use a dark brown thread to match that also. Hook sizes, again, will vary. I have a size 14 in the vise right now. I've mashed the barb. I'm going to go ahead and dress the hook shank.
You know, the naturals vary from 14s to 16, but sometimes the nymph can even be tied a little larger than that.
Sure. And what I've done is I've taken one of these hackles off of that saddle, and I'm just going to pull a very few out and form a tail. Now, this is a little bit short, but the tail on these nymphs are fairly short anyway, at least the ones that I've read anything about.
And fairly sparse.
Yes, yes. Now, again, for the dubbing, I'm going to go a little bit heavier maybe than we were on the dry, but this doesn't matter on this one because I'm going to build enough of a body with it.
Hey, you still don't want to be too heavy because the natural insect, you know, is quite slim.
Oh, on this one it is?
Oh,
I thought this one had a little bit more bulk
to it.
Well,
a little bit, but it's still a fairly small bug. And again, the colors can vary a little bit. In fact, some patterns call for a little bit of maybe a little cream mixed in.
Oh, Now I'm just going to start forward with this and build a little taper as I go. In this particular one, I'm definitely not going to have enough dubbing, which is fine. I'll just add just a little bit more.
Well, you'll find this when you use real sparse dubbing, that happens, that you use more of building up the bulk, and you often have to add a little bit, and that's perfectly all right.
And now I'm going to take just a small section of this turkey. This will become the wing case.
I thought you said you were going to take a small section of this turkey.
No, turkey.
There's no comma in there.
All right, thank you. We'll lay it in on top and tie it down. Now here again, there are several different ways you can hackle this fly. We're going to do one maybe a little different that some people haven't seen, but you could tie it on as a beard, you could tie it on as just a mustache, you could tie it on whatever.
The mustache is just like the beard style, except there's two of them coming out the bottom.
Out to the sides.
And I kind of like this style because it sticks out to the side a bit.
So what I've done is I've just tied on the wing case and I've tied on the hackle at the same time.
Now you're going to build up the thorax a little fatter than the body.
Yes. Now the thorax is going to come.
But again, you can use sparse dubbing and just make more
And just
turns to
make
build
it-
up that bulk
that's
because it
right.
makes it more solid.
And I'm going to go backwards just a little to make sure I get everything filled in right there where I was. Move all this forward. And now I'm going to wrap this hackle forward. You don't need but about a turn and a half, 2 turns maybe. Come to the front, and I'm going to trim this off.
You might mention about that Cree. You mentioned it was multicolored.
It is multicolored.
It's
You can
really
see
what it is
there's-
a grizzly, black and white with a brown band in there as well.
I'm not sure the camera will see that, but here it runs from a real light to a light brown to a dark brown. It's
Very
a
nice
beautiful
feather. They are rare, as you said. Some people call them the one-feather Adams fly because
sure.
instead of mixing brown
It's
hackle
all
with
there
grizzly, it's all
together.
there in one.
That's
Yeah.
right. Now what I'm going to do is come in and trim this hackle, top and bottom. I'll roll my vise over to make it a little easier. And then all I do is fold that wing case over right in the middle of it. Tie it down. Stand it up and build just a small head there. Put a whip on it.
It's a good fly to use in combination with the dry fly pattern.
Oh, I bet it is.
Really should
You
have both
bet.
in your box.
And there's the Hendrickson Nymph. For the tail and legs, we use the Cree hackle. For the body, we use the dark brown dubbing. And for the wing case, we use the dark turkey.
All right, now we go from the sublime, these nice imitative Eastern patterns, to something totally ridiculous. And
This
that's
is not ridiculous.
well, it's not. It's very reasonable, but it's quite an extreme from what we just did.
Well, that's true.
And that's a clipped antelope hair mouse.
Okay, the only thing really clipped on this is the head, but we'll have fun
Oh,
with
good.
it.
Well,
okay?
then you tie it
All
a
right.
lot like I do.
Okay. What we'll use is just 2 different materials. I'm going to use antelope hair. I'm going to use a thread from, I've pulled out of an old burlap sack. Now, a lot of people don't like to tie with antelope. It's more brittle than deer hair is. Antelope hair, in some cases, is a little bit hard to find.
I was going to ask you, why are you tying out of antelope rather than
Well,
elk or deer?
Antelope will float longer than deer or elk, either one. You have to be a little bit careful as you tie with it because of the brittleness of it.
Well, that's what I've found when I've tried tying with it.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
it's very
it will.
dry and brittle, at
Sure.
least what I had was.
Now, what I'm going to use brown thread to go with this. I've already put a number 2 loop eye hook in the vise. I'll go ahead and dress this whole hook shank.
You know, talking about hook sizes, I don't know if I've tied large mice or small muskrats, but I've tied them as big as 5/0 saltwater hooks for great
Oh,
big
really?
northern pike.
Huh.
Up in the Northwest Territories where we were catching 20-pound plus northern pike,
Okay.
we were using huge mice.
Sure.
And for a tail, we'd clip a little piece of chamois leather.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because when it gets wet, it gets very, very slinky. and
Well,
it's
I'm sure
very
chamois
durable.
could be used with this
Yeah.
too,
Oh,
but
sure.
I'm just using just a little piece of burlap just to
The part
keep
about
it
the
simple.
chamois is when it's wet, you know what a wet chamois feels like. It's very, very slinky.
Now I'm going to take just a very small clump of this antelope, and this first section that goes on, all of this hair is going to be kept on top. It will fall around as I wrap, but the majority of the hair will be kept on top. I'm going to take a soft loop, pull it tight. That's all I'm going to do with that. Now I'm going to go through and clip off just the top section of that hair. Move it aside and move my thread forward.
All right, well, already you do it a little bit differently. I use deer or elk, and actually I like elk very much. I spin the whole thing,
Okay.
and I make no trims for the heads. It's very crude. Now, if I'm fishing bass and pike, you know, a lot of people will put little ears and little
Sure.
eyes and little nose and little...
Catch fishermen.
Yeah, but mine, I just spin that stuff on there,
Okay.
clip the bottom off flat, and that's it.
Well, this I don't have to clip the bottom. Now this wing's going to be just go to the same length as the first one I put on.
You know, without that clipping, with the hair laying back, they very soft feel.
Broke
And
my
I'm
thread.
sure to a big voracious pike or bass, it feels very natural
Sure.
rather than getting the hard, stumpy
Sure.
clip stuff. So it doesn't take much time to tie these things, and they're extremely effective. Now, when we were using these great big ones up in Canada, we had to fish them with a number 10 saltwater tapered line because they were so air resistant.
Oh, so yeah, it'd be
we
hard
didn't
to
need that big a
cast.
rod for the fish.
Well, this will be a little bit heavy like that
bushy.
too. Well, heavy, it's a little bit harder to cast. But this fly will float so high and so well. Again, now I'm just going to lay that on there. Here comes the wraps again.
You're just kind of stacking it
4 or 5
along,
wraps, just stack it in there. And
You
again,
know,
I'm going to get rid of this
When we
top.
went into the Northwest Territories, we were up at a camp where it was all native guides, and most of them weren't too comfortable taking out a fly fisherman in the first place because
Especially you, Dave.
Well, especially me, yeah. But they figured they had a pool for whoever caught the biggest fish got the money among the natives, and but we found one guy that really wanted to take us out and learn about fly fishing, and he pulled us into a pikey area. And of course, I grew up in Minnesota fishing pike, and so it was no mystery to me. And he'd pull us around these flat, weedy bays, and if we'd see a log and the log moved, we'd cast to it.
Did pull you around?
Yeah, in the
Really?
shallow
Just
bay.
like with a saltwater? Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, because it was fairly shallow and weedy. And of course, the mouse was perfect because we could drag it right over the weeds.
Sure.
Where the people that were using the big hardware
Get hung up.
keep getting hung up. But when I pulled out that mouse, the guy didn't say anything. He just kind of rolled his eyes skyward. And I laid out a long, long cast and gave it a few twitches and saw a wake coming, and a 17-pounder hit that thing and came up out of the water.
Oh, no kidding.
The guide almost fell out of the boat.
Did you almost fall out of the boat, too? Now, again, all I'm doing is just laying this hair right on top of each other as I go forward. Now, I'm up to the last section now.
Of course, we talk about bass and pike, but you know this is also a good trout lure for big rainbows and brown trout.
Big browns.
Alaska and anywhere where there's big browns, fish one of these at night.
You bet.
And it's a very versatile fly in a wide range of sizes. I guess this is sort of a medium size. You can tie them certainly smaller than that
I'm going to
and
put
much
one
larger.
more clump. Now this one, I'm not going to trim that top at all because I'm going to spin one section now in front of that, pack that together just a little bit. Now this one I'm going to put in the opposite way with the tips out over the eye of the hook.
Oh, why is that?
Well, when I spin it, then it kind of gives me a little handle to grab onto to fold it out of the way. I'll show you what I mean. I'll spin that whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Then I'll take
Then you
my
can draw it back
packer,
to make the head, sure.
and pack that together. Now I can draw all that together.
Ah, yes. That's a good trick to know.
And
that would be applicable when
do
you're
the
tying
same
any kind of a
muddlers.
muddler, any kind of a clipped head.
You bet.
No, I like
Put
that.
one more little whip finish on that.
Because that's really a problem, putting heads sometimes on there
You
and
get
tying
the-
fibers down.
Yes, and
And
you
that
get the stuff
eliminates it.
tangled in. Now all I'm going to do is go in and trim just this front. I'm going to just leave it in the vise and go around. Come in and trim that belly off flat.
You really
Open
need
that
to do
up.
that to open up the gap of the hook
Absolutely.
so that you can hook these
You
fish.
may catch fish with that belly closed off like that, but not as easily.
I get mine quite flat,
Yes.
quite flat. You know,
But you
talking
can
about, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You can see how that hair, even though I didn't spin it throughout the body, it has totally enclosed that hook on the bottom.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can't see a hook
Yeah.
in there at all.
You know, I have to chuckle. I think about that trip to the Northwest Territories. We were fishing at a place on the McKenzie River where the McKenzie comes out of Great Slave Lake, and the river's about 3 miles wide at its source. And it's so full of pike that the average stay at the lodge we were, they told us, was only about 4 days. People just got tired of catching big pike.
Really?
And it was amazing. But another writer and I flew in and came in a little bit later after the rest of the guests were out on the river. And we went out to the guide took us to a place called Pike City. And it just had pike written all over it. And shortly after we got there, a whole group of the rest of the people at the lodge, there were 8 or 9 boats came in, each with 2 fishermen, and we were the only fly fishers. And by actual count, while they were catching about 10 fish on big daredevils, we caught, I think it was very close to 60 pike.
I've heard that so many times,
and
that
again,
the flies many times will outfish.
Because we were scooting these big mice over the weeds.
You bet.
And the rest of the people kept spending all their time taking weeds off their daredevils.
Yeah.
It was an amazing thing. And then we left and I went to another place. And when we got back to the lodge, we still hadn't met the people yet because they were out fishing. And
were they mad at you?
Well, when we came back, they were all down on the dock. And there were a bunch of Texans there. The whole place was taken over with these Texans. And they came out in the dock, and one guy said, "What the hell were you guys doing out there?" And so we took them under our wings. And
had to show them what it was.
You know, what we did is we went around the Northwest Territories. Most of the places hadn't seen fly fishermen before up there. And in fact, the bellhop in the lodge was all excited about us going fishing until he heard we were going to be fly fishing.
Didn't anyone
and he said, "Oh, you might as well go home now. You're not going to catch anything." And well, we told him that fish were only fish, and if we could, so we caught lake trout and things. But these pike, we got this group of Texans down on the dock. Everywhere we went, we'd do a little fly fishing show for the guests in the lodge because they hadn't seen it. So we'd teach them how to cast, and I had a little routine that I would go through fairly regularly, and I'd always save the best till last. And I said, now for a grand finale, like any showman, I'm going to save the best till last, and I want you. And I'd point to one of the little native cooks or somebody that I knew had never done this before. I'd get them out on the dock, and I said, now you've seen the whole show. Here's a rod. Do it. And, of course, they couldn't. And in about 2 minutes, I'd have that person making a very nice cast.
Sure, you bet.
So I said, that's the best thing I can do for you is show you how easy this is. Well, one of the Texans said, if you really want to have a finale, you'd take that mouse and show us how to catch a pike. And I said, well, I happened to have it right there in the boat, the rod rigged up, and I grabbed it, and I said, well, this really isn't the time or the place to catch a pike, but I can show you how we cast that big fly and how we work it on the water and what we would do with it. And I made a few casts, and I caught a 7-pound pike.
Oh, my word, right off the dock.
And before I was done, every one of those Texans came out, got a quick casting lesson, and every single one of them caught a pike off the dock with that mouse. That's how good the pike fishing was.
Well, there's a little basic antelope mouse. It's a simple little fly to tie, very, very high floating fly.
Oh, yeah.
And it won't maybe stand up to the abuse that deer hair will, but it will certainly float a whole lot here.
See that nice profile and see that softness
very
to
nice.
it.
Sure. And as you turn it over looking at it from the underside, like the fish would see it, great fly.
It just
super
feels
fly.
like something alive.
Absolutely.
And I'm convinced that the fish hang on to it better.
Sure.
Because they think it's something good to eat. Now, do you put floating on that too?
Can, absolutely.
I usually do.
And it will
just to help waterproof it a little so it doesn't get too soggy and sink low.
But I've heard the people talk that dye hair, deer hair versus antelope hair, you can put twice as many deer skins in a dye vat as you can antelope.
Because it soaks up so much.
Yes, because it's that buoyant. That's how much difference there is between the two.
Now, does that mean that it's soaking up more dye?
No, it won't sink.
It won't
go down
sink.
as far. Won't go down.
I thought you meant it was soaking up more fluid,
no.
I see.
It just floats that high.
Well, that's interesting.
But there's the little mouse. It's a dandy little fly.
Well, that does look good. And I like the way you trimmed that head.
I think it would work for bass. I think it would work for pike.
Sure it would.
I've never tried it for steelhead, but if steelhead were coming up and taking on the surface, I really do think they'd grab that little guy.
Now, if you were tying it for trout, it's probably a good idea to tie it a little smaller and maybe even do some clipping.
Sure.
But I think that works really well. Well, that's our show for tonight. And what have we done? We've done the Hendrickson Dry
fly.
And we've done the Hendrickson Nymph. And I hope
Antelope
I'm right in saying that's the Ephemerella subvaria. I haven't lived in the East long enough to remember, but I think that's true. And
the fish won't know the difference.
Fish won't know the difference. I've never had a fish yet that could quote Latin to me.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, we've tied this deer hair mouse. And if you're not into mice...
Antelope mouse.
Antelope mouse. If you're not into mice, give it a try. And I guarantee you'll catch some big fish. Good night.
Dave and Leroy have produced a new 90-minute video on fly tying techniques. To order a copy, call the number on your screen. These tips are only $28.95 plus $3.95 shipping and handling. Please have your credit card ready and call 1-800-883-0124 to order fly tying techniques. You can also order the programs in this series. There are 3 programs on each 90-minute tape for $22.95 plus shipping and handling. Call 1-800-883-0124 and order your fly tying videos or the techniques tape.